How to screen tenants properly. Avoid bad tenants. What if I told you that one bad tenant can cost you more than an entire year of rental income? I'm not exaggerating. Eviction proceedings, property damage, legal fees, lost rent, emotional stress, it all adds up fast. And the scariest part is that most landlords who end up in that nightmare situation had no idea they were letting a ticking time bomb through their front door. Today, we're going to change that. Hello, I'm Neelis, and by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly how to screen tenants properly, spot the red flags before you hand over the keys, and protect your investment like a seasoned professional. And I'm going to share 3 real case studies of landlords who skipped the screening process and paid a devastating price. So stay with me because this information could save you tens of thousands of dollars and years of headaches. Let's start with the big picture question. Why do so many landlords get this wrong? The answer is simpler than you might think. When your property is sitting vacant, you feel pressure. Every day that passes without a tenant is money leaving your pocket. So when someone shows up, seems friendly, tells a good story, and hands you a deposit check, the temptation to just say yes is overwhelming. That emotional pressure is exactly what causes landlords to skip the process, cut corners, and trust their gut over their due diligence. And here is the hard truth. Your gut is not a screening system. It never was and it never will be. Proper tenant screening is not about being harsh or judgmental. It is about being systematic. It is about replacing emotion with process and replacing hope with evidence. The landlords who rarely have tenant problems are not lucky. They are disciplined. They follow a consistent framework every single time, regardless of how nice the applicant seems, how quickly they need to move in, or how many other people are competing for the unit. That framework is what we're going to build for you today. Before we dive into the how, let's talk about the why through the lens of real experience. I want to walk you through 3 case studies that illustrate what happens when screening gets skipped or rushed. These stories are representative of patterns that play out constantly in the rental industry, and understanding them is going to make the practical advice hit so much harder. Case study number 1. A landlord in a mid-sized city had a 2-bedroom apartment come vacant in the middle of winter. Winter vacancies are notoriously hard to fill because fewer people move during cold months. After the unit sat empty for 6 weeks, a young couple came in, presented themselves well, said all the right things, and offered to pay 2 months up front. The landlord, relieved and eager to stop the bleeding, accepted their offer and skipped the background check and credit pull because, in his words, they seemed like good people and they had cash ready to go. What followed was a slow motion disaster. The couple paid those first 2 months and then went silent. When the landlord reached out about month 3, there were excuses. A partial payment came in, then nothing. By month 4, the landlord discovered the apartment had been sublet to 3 additional people without permission. The place was being used as a short-term rental on a third-party platform, and the noise complaints from neighbors had been stacking up for weeks. The eviction process took 4.5 months due to local tenant protection laws. And when the couple finally vacated, the apartment required over $14,000 in repairs. A simple background check would have revealed 2 prior evictions and a history of fraudulent rental applications. The upfront cash was a manipulation tactic they had used before. Case study number 2 involves a landlord with a small portfolio of 3 rental homes. She prided herself on being a compassionate landlord, someone who gave people a chance when others wouldn't. When a single father came to view one of her properties, he told her about a rough patch he had been through, a divorce, a period of unemployment, but assured her he had a new job and was rebuilding. She was moved by his situation and decided to waive the income verification step because, in her mind, asking for pay stubs felt invasive and overly formal. The tenant moved in, and for the first 3 months, things seemed fine. Then the rent started coming in late, then not at all. When she finally initiated formal communication, it turned out the tenant had misrepresented his employment situation entirely. The job he claimed to have did not exist. Income verification would have revealed this within minutes. What followed was a 7-month ordeal involving the courts, a formal eviction process, unpaid rent totaling nearly $11,000, and significant damage to the property, including a broken heating system that had been neglected during the winter months. The landlord also faced a fair housing complaint during the proceedings, which added legal costs she had not anticipated. Her compassion, while genuine, was not a substitute for process. Case study number 3 is perhaps the most alarming because it involves a landlord who actually did some screening but did it inconsistently. He ran credit checks on applicants he felt uncertain about and skipped them for applicants who seemed stable and professional. When a well dressed man in his 40s applied for a premium property, the landlord felt confident and skipped the criminal background check because the man had a solid looking credit score and spoke with authority about his career. What the landlord did not know was that the applicant had a recent criminal history involving fraud and property related offenses, none of which showed up in a credit check because they were criminal matters, not financial ones. Over the following year, the tenant used the property address to run a series of questionable business operations, created significant liability exposure for the landlord, ignored multiple lease terms, and when the situation finally escalated to legal action, the landlord discovered that his inconsistent screening practices actually weakened his legal position because he could not demonstrate a uniform, documented policy. The court proceedings dragged on and cost him over $20,000 in legal fees alone. 3 different landlords, 3 very different situations, but one common thread running through all of them: the absence of a consistent, comprehensive screening process. Let that sink in, because those case studies are not outliers. They represent what happens every single day to landlords who rely on instinct, sympathy, or partial information. Now let's get into the actual framework. How do you screen tenants properly? There are 6 pillars of effective tenant screening, and when you apply all 6 consistently, you stack the odds dramatically in your favor. Pillar 1 is the application itself. This is your foundation, and it needs to be thorough. A proper rental application should collect full legal name, date of birth, current and previous addresses for at least the last 5 years, current and previous landlord contact information, employment history for at least the last 2 years, including employer name and contact, monthly income, the number of occupants who will be living in the unit, vehicle information if parking is relevant, pet information, and authorization signatures for the credit and background checks you are about to run. Every single applicant should complete the same application. No exceptions. No shortcuts for people who seem trustworthy. Consistency is not just good practice, it is legal protection. Pillar 2 is income verification. The general industry benchmark is that a tenant's gross monthly income should be at least 2.5 to 3 times the monthly rent. But the number alone is not enough. You need to verify it. Request recent pay stubs, ideally the last 2 to 3 months. For self-employed applicants, request tax returns from the last 2 years and bank statements. For applicants receiving benefits or other income sources, request documentation of that income. Do not take someone's word for what they earn. Get the paperwork, review it carefully, and if the numbers do not add up, that is your answer. Pillar 3 is the credit check. A credit report tells you a story about how a person manages their financial obligations. You are specifically looking at their credit score as a general indicator, but also at the details: late payments, collections, outstanding debts, patterns of financial behavior. Most landlords set a minimum credit score threshold, and while that threshold can vary depending on your market and property type, a score below 600 is generally a significant red flag. More important than the score, however, are the patterns. Does this person pay their bills? Do they have a history of going delinquent? Have they had accounts sent to collections repeatedly? These patterns tell you how they are likely to treat their rent obligation. To run a credit check, you need written authorization from the applicant, which your application form should already collect. Pillar 4 is the background check. This is the step that the third landlord in our case study skipped, and it cost him everything. A criminal background check is not about discrimination, it is about protecting your property, your other tenants, if you have a multi unit building, and yourself. You are looking for convictions that represent a genuine risk in the context of being a tenant. Prior evictions are particularly telling. Drug-related offenses involving manufacturing or distribution are relevant if they suggest property damage risk. Fraud and deception-related offenses are relevant because they speak to integrity in financial dealings. You must familiarize yourself with fair housing laws in your jurisdiction, as there are limits on how you can use criminal history information in tenant decisions. But running the check and having a documented, consistent policy is something every serious landlord should do. Pillar 5 is rental history verification. This step is critically underused and wildly valuable. Contact previous landlords, not just the most recent one, but the one before that as well. People sometimes list the current landlord who has already been dealing with problems, but the landlord before that one often has more candid information. When you call previous landlords, ask specific questions. Did the tenant pay rent on time? Did they give proper notice before vacating? Would you rent to them again? That last question is your truth serum. If a former landlord pauses, gives a vague answer, or finds a reason to avoid directly answering whether they would rent to this person again, you have your answer. Also, verify that the landlord you are speaking with is actually the real landlord. Cross reference the name and contact information with property records if possible, because some applicants list a friend or family member as a fake landlord reference. Pillar 6 is the in person interaction and property showing. Pay attention to how applicants treat the property during the showing. Do they handle things carefully? Are they respectful of the space? Do they ask thoughtful questions that reflect genuine interest in being a good tenant? Or do they seem focused only on what they can get away with? The showing is also an opportunity to observe how they communicate, whether they are straightforward with you and whether anything they say contradicts information on their application. Trust what you observe, but do not let charm override the evidence from your other 5 pillars. Now, there are a few additional things you need to know about this process to apply it legally and effectively. First, consistency is everything. You must apply the same screening criteria to every single applicant. If you have a credit score minimum, apply it universally. If you require income verification, require it from everyone. Inconsistent screening opens you up to fair housing complaints, and it also removes the objectivity that makes the process work. Document your criteria in writing before you begin accepting applications. Second, understand fair housing laws. In most jurisdictions, you cannot discriminate based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. Many areas have additional protected classes. Your screening criteria must be based on legitimate, documented business factors, financial reliability, rental history, ability to meet the lease terms. Run your policies by a local real estate attorney to make sure you are fully compliant. Third, set your standards before you start showing the property. Decide in advance what your minimum income requirement is, what your credit threshold is, how you will handle prior evictions, and what your policy is on pets and additional occupants. When your standards are set in advance and documented, you make decisions based on criteria rather than emotion, and you are far less vulnerable to manipulation. Fourth, take your time. Do not let urgency cloud your judgment. If an applicant pressures you to make a fast decision, that is a red flag in itself. Quality tenants generally understand that a thorough screening process is part of a professional landlord tenant relationship. If someone is pushing you to skip steps or decide before you have completed your due diligence, slow down, not speed up. Now, here is something I want you to really think about. Screening is not a one time event that ends when someone moves in. It begins a relationship. How you conduct the screening process sends a signal about what kind of landlord you are and what kind of tenancy this will be. Landlords who are professional, organized, and thorough in screening tend to attract tenants who respect that professionalism. When an applicant sees that you take this seriously, the people who have something to hide tend to self select out, and the tenants who are genuinely reliable appreciate knowing they are entering a well managed property. The screening process also creates documentation that protects you legally if things ever go sideways. When every step is recorded, the application, the verification steps, the decision criteria, the communications, you have a paper trail that demonstrates you acted in good faith and followed a consistent process. That documentation is worth its weight in gold if you ever end up in front of a judge or a fair housing investigator. At this point, you might be thinking, this is a lot to manage, especially if you have multiple properties or are new to the landlord game, and you are right. Doing this well takes knowledge, systems, and ongoing education. That is exactly why I want to point you toward the effective property management courses available in the description below this video. These courses are designed specifically for landlords who want to go from reactive and stressed to confident and systematic. Whether you are managing your first property or building out a portfolio, the frameworks inside those courses will walk you through not just tenant screening, but every aspect of running a rental property like a professional operation. I have seen landlords completely transform their experience from constant headaches to passive income that actually feels passive after going through this material. Check it out in the description and see which course level is right for where you are right now. Let me bring this home with something that ties everything together. The three landlords in our case studies did not fail because they were bad people or even inexperienced. They failed because they let pressure, compassion, and overconfidence override process. And the heartbreaking thing is that each of those situations was entirely preventable. A background check that takes 15 minutes, a phone call to a prior landlord, a pay stub request. Simple, systematic steps that would have changed everything. The tenants who cause the most damage are often the most persuasive. They have practiced their stories. They know what landlords want to hear. They are skilled at creating urgency and building rapport. Your best defense against someone like that is not your ability to read people. It is your commitment to a process that does not care how charming someone is. Think about what it would mean for your financial future if every tenant you placed from this point forward was screened thoroughly and consistently. Fewer vacancies caused by problematic tenancies, less money spent on repairs and legal proceedings, more mental energy available for growing your portfolio rather than managing crises. That is not a fantasy. That is what proper screening creates. It is the foundation on which every successful landlord's portfolio is built. There is a concept I want to leave you with, and it is this: a vacancy costs you money today. A bad tenant costs you money for months or even years. When you frame it that way, the urgency to fill a unit at any cost starts to look very different. The most expensive decision you can make as a landlord is placing the wrong tenant because you were in a hurry or because you let your emotions lead. Taking an extra week to find the right person is almost always the better financial decision, even when it does not feel like it in the moment. You now have the six pillars of tenant screening. You understand why the process matters through the lens of three real consequences. You know what documentation to gather, what questions to ask, how to verify the information, and how to make consistent, defensible decisions. You understand the legal framework you need to operate within, and you know where to go for deeper, more structured education through the effective property management courses linked below. What I want you to do right now is take an honest look at your current screening process. If you do not have one documented in writing, that is your first action step. Write it down, make it consistent, commit to applying it every single time. If you already have a process but you are not applying all six pillars, identify the gaps and close them before your next vacancy. If this video gave you value and shifted the way you think about tenant screening, please share it with a fellow landlord who needs to hear this. There are so many people out there managing properties without this knowledge and paying the price for it. And if you want to go deeper on any aspect of property management, the courses in the description are your next step. I will see you in the next video.